Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back. Thank you for joining in and hanging in with us. Welcome to the Areyousure, the podcast where we are aiming to inspire Bible believers to become Bible students. Hopefully, you have fun with the last two episodes. So we're going to jump right into episode 5. So as we started, if you've been following along, you've been knowing that, or you should know that we've been really focusing on the character of God, and we looked at the Bible from a perspective of the conflict between two characters. So now that we've really addressed God's character, who's left?
The antagonist.
There we go.
The
There we go.
antagonist. Yeah. So in Genesis 3:15, we talked about, the introduction of that conflict, after Satan had his triumph, that immediately Christ comes in with a plan. And we went through that in Genesis 3:15. And, we looked at the three layers that are kind of on the surface. In most of the scriptures, there's the surface layer and there's those layers beneath the surface. But in Genesis 3:15, it's like all three of those layers come to the surface. And on the surface, you have the cursing that's being done upon the serpent. But then you also have that spiritual warfare that talks about the enmity that'll be between her seed and thy seed. And then also you have the prophetic, it shall bruise thy head, which is something that is going to be future.
Mm-hmm.
So before we proceed, like I said, we want to examine the scriptures that deal with Satan's past and see if we can piece together his backstory.
Okay. And I think we mentioned before briefly that there's not a whole lot devoted to his character, which for good cause, but there's just enough for us to have a true understanding of who our enemy is.
Yeah, and really what it is there's not a lot directly spoken about him.
Yes.
But in the characters that are displaying wickedness and evil, we are getting glimpses of his character. But as far as scriptures that deal directly with him, no, there's not a lot. But there is enough.
There's enough. There is
enough. And so, when you talk about Lucifer's backstory, it's a real mystery. And sometimes it can awaken even more questions than what it answers. You know what I'm saying? But I think the real core of the lesson of his story is no matter how close to God you are, you can fall away.
Yes. Because we mentioned in the last episode that he was at the right hand.
Oh, yeah. He was at least right at the throne of God, as the covering cherub.
Which is, and we're going to get into this, and this is something that's going to open a can of worms down the road, I know, but Lucifer did lose his salvation, and he was at the right hand of God.
Lucifer was in heaven. He lost heaven. So yeah, he was in heaven and lost heaven.
Yes.
So that's what I'm saying. His story really reveals that no matter how close to God you are, the power of choice, wrongly exercised, can cause you or lead you away from God to the point of no return.
Right.
So that's really what his story is supposed to teach us.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, again, we go right back to that first lie, you shall not surely die. It has evolved over the years to mean different things. And now it's that, once saved, always saved, or you cannot be lost, and so on and so forth, or you cannot lose salvation. But it's the same thing. He knows how close you can be to God. He knows that you can be in heaven and get kicked out of heaven by the wrong use of the free will.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that is what we're supposed to learn from his story. And so, does the Bible say enough to piece together a clear picture of Lucifer? As we said, it says enough, and after that, we get to see, two characters displayed with the different characters that we have introduced. And there are certain stories that you could go to for sure that kind of displays what happened in heaven. And we're not going to necessarily look at those today, but we're going to look at the actual scriptures that deal with Lucifer's backstory. And we're going to start in Ezekiel 28. We've been here before. Now we're going to examine it a little bit closer.
Okay.
All right, so let's go to Ezekiel 28. We're going to start at verse 12. And it says, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in youth. Now, I'm thinking of maybe episode 2 or 3.
Yeah, we talked about
How it's not talking about the literal king of Tyrus,
right,
but it's talking about
the spirit behind it.
exactly. And we see that again in Isaiah 14. He's taking up a proverb against the king of Babylon.
Mhm.
It names the king of Babylon. It actually calls Lucifer's name.
Mhm.
And so, again, that's what we said. And after Genesis chapter 3, these two entities move to the background, but we see them through the influence that they have over these different men and women that they are controlled or influenced. And so we're told that he sealeth up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Now, when you look at these words, seal, full, and perfect, it implies he was a masterpiece. All these words basically mean complete. So it says seal. When you seal something, it's because it's full. He was full of wisdom. He was perfect in beauty. So these things are implying that he was God's masterpiece. And it says, seal us up the sum. Therefore, sum means pattern. So it means that he was the complete pattern. And what that means is that God has gifts that he's going to give to all the different created beings. Lucifer had them all. His name was Lucifer, which means light bearer. So when Lucifer received light from God, he was to carry it to all other intelligent beings. He was the light bearer.
Right.
So light, of course, means knowledge, wisdom, understanding, and all these things. So Lucifer's position as the covering cherub means that he was the highest messenger of God.
Mhm.
And so to be able to instruct other intelligent beings in the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of God, he was given all the gifts. He was given all the understanding of the creation, the sciences, and organization. All these things were given to Lucifer for his exalted position. He was the anointed cherub.
And it's interesting how, now we've just kind of downgraded him to a comical character with a pitchfork and a tail.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous misconception of the enemy.
Yeah, that would mean that God created something with a pitchfork and a tail. What we see from Genesis chapter 1, we don't see the entire creation of what happened before earth, but we can see from Genesis chapter 1 that when God creates something, it is very good.
Right.
It is very beautiful. So here we're told that he is perfect in beauty. So he was not created unattractive. He is attractive. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it was pleasing to the eyes. It was good for food. You know what I'm saying? So that tree that represented him was a perfect example. It was beautiful. It actually had some benefits to it because he has knowledge, wisdom, and understanding from God. Now, he's corrupted that for the purpose of evil, but he can still teach you things that are of value of what he was given from his creation. And so when you look at verse 13, let's look at verse 13 real quick. It says, thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, the topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, the jasper, and the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Now you see here that we're actually getting details of Lucifer's creation. So it's like, do we have enough details in the Bible to piece together a story? Oh, yes.
Mhm.
Yes, we do. We've just been told that he sealeth up the sum, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty, and that from the day he was created, his tabrets and pipes were prepared in him, and that he was decorated with every stone. This is talking about his actual creation, and that he was in Eden after his creation. We talked about that also in part 2 when we talked about all is at rest.
Mhm.
And so we're actually seeing that Lucifer's creation story and his story in general actually parallels Adam's story.
Right.
Just like we get details of how Adam was created, that God created man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a little soul, living soul. And then he placed him in the Garden of Eden. We're seeing the same type of scenario with Lucifer. That Lucifer, he sealeth up the sum, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty, and then that every precious stone was his covering. He names all of these gems, and then that his tabrets and pipes were prepared in him, and that he was in Eden, the garden of God. This is all happening before his fall.
Mhm.
And so then we move on, and we start to see that of course we know he was not a human being because it says he was created. This is how, again, that we know this is not talking about the literal king of Tyrus, but that is talking about Lucifer. But it says that his tabrets were prepared in him. Now, tabrets is a percussion instrument, which keeps the rhythm of music. And pipes is a wind instrument that makes the melody of music. So Lucifer, it didn't say that he had wisdom on how to play these instruments. It says that these things were prepared in him from the day that he was created. And so basically the power of music was a part of his makeup. And the power of music has the ability to convey a message across language, across nationality, and across even gender. And so, the effects of music, when they're used as they're intended, can lift the person up from sadness, from depression, into, a correct understanding of God. So music was actually given to uplift the creator and uplift the thoughts of the individuals using music to the creator. But when music is used as a weapon, it can actually degrade the morals of society. And that's how we see things happening today. One generation to the next, the music has gotten more and more immoral. And at one point, it seemed like the music was, we can at least say, more tasteful. But when you look back from a Christian lens, you see that even those things that seemed like they were, more tasteful, were still glorifying fornication. They just weren't saying the lewd language, but they were talking about, sexual relations outside of marriage. Even though the music and the melodies were beautiful, it still was not uplifting the law of God. It was actually, making palatable the transgression of the law of God.
And the interesting thing about that is, even today, some gospel music kind of leans into some of the lewdness, they get a little too far away from pretty much what God's expectation would be. They try to conform to the world a little bit more than they should be, as far as setting the standard and saying, no, this is the way it should be. It's just, you look at some of the videos and listen to some of the music. It's just like, wait a minute, is this R&B song, a rap song, or like what? And you kind of get lost.
Because just like those two trees at the beginning, it is a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that's what, again, we seem to miss the point that Lucifer is not trying to turn you into an atheist. He's not trying to turn you into, something gothic. He just wants a mixture of good and evil, a mixture of Christianity and worldliness. And that leads to death. He knows that he doesn't need 100%. He only needs 1%. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Just
or a percentage of 1%. He just needs you not to make a full surrender to God.
Right.
And so, from days of old, people have been trying to prove that you can keep 1 foot in the kingdom and 1 foot in the world and still have all the blessings of the kingdom and all the pleasures of the world.
Right.
And in your mind and your imagination, that may be. But of course, when Christ comes, that's when we'll see, if that actual mindset is true. It's not until the judgment is made manifest that we can say what is what. Now, we can go by our feelings and our imagination and how something makes us feel, but that is not the standard of judgment. The standard of judgment is, the law of God itself.
Yeah, you just can't be lukewarm, basically. That's being lukewarm.
Yeah. And so if we go on to verse 14, it says, "Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire." And so again, I think we said this in part 2 as well, that a cherub is first introduced in Genesis. And these are the order of beings that we know of as angels. Now, the word angel in the Bible does not mean a winged being from heaven. That's not what it means. The word angel actually means messenger or one who is sent. And because these cherubim, seraphims, and all those order of beings that we call angels are only sent when they come with a message from God, they took on this title as angels. But John the Baptist was also called an angel. "Behold, I send my messenger before my face." That's the same word messenger is translated from the same word that's translated as angel.
Okay.
And so when you talk about the anointed cherub that covereth, that is their actual name or their order, cherub. When you hear cherub, that is talking about a being from heaven, a celestial being. And again, we're first introduced to them in Genesis 3 when he's put at the garden to keep the way of the tree of life. And so it says that Lucifer was the anointed cherub that covereth. And we spoke before about how when Moses had to build the sanctuary, that he was told to build the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. And on the mercy seat would be two cherubs, and their wings were to cover the mercy seat. And the mercy seat, of course, was an illustration of the throne of God. And the Shekinah glory that was there was an illustration of the presence of God. And so the fact that the covering cherub's wing covered the mercy seat is that he was covering the presence of God. And so Lucifer, being the anointed cherub that covereth, means that he had a position at God's throne to cover God's glory, which means that he was the attendant of God's throne, constantly soaking in the light of God. And so this is his name again, right? Light bearer. Now, we actually get a glimpse of what this would have been like in the story of Moses. And this is what I mean. You know, sometimes the details about certain things are given through other stories that we read. You know, Moses was one of the few people who spoke to God face to face. And I think he was unique in the fact that he spoke to God kind of in a form where God was not appearing as a human being or something like this in the mountain. Yeah. So in Exodus 33, let's go to Exodus 33 real quick. Exodus 33. Because we get an example of, you know, Lucifer's appearance in Moses. And Moses is actually coming off the mountain in the form of or I should say, in the original purpose of Lucifer. So watch this.
Okay.
Exodus 33. Exodus 33 and verse 18 and 19. And Moses says to the God, and I beseech thee, show me thy glory. And the Lord said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. Now let's go over, after the Lord had shown him his glory, let's go over to Exodus 34 and see what happened to Moses afterwards. All right, starting at verse 29, Exodus 34:29. And it says, and it came to pass, when Moses came down from the Mount Sinai, with the two tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come nigh him. And so now Moses has been up in the presence of God. He's now coming down from the mountain of God, holding the law of God. He asked God to show him his glory, and God showed him some of his glory. He said, you couldn't see me directly, but I'll put you in the mountain and I'll cover you with my hand. You can see my hind parts. So he just spent a few moments looking at God from behind. And when he came down off the mountain, that light was reflected in him and everybody could see it. And he came down from the mountain, light on his face, and the two tables of stone in his hand. He was giving you a picture of what Lucifer's position was supposed to be. Moses was up in the mount receiving instruction from God. Then he comes down to give instruction to the people. The light of God is seen on his person, and the light of God is in his hand, the two tables of stone. How do I know that those two tables of stone represent the light of God? Good question. Right? Good question. Now turn to Proverbs 6:23. As a matter of fact, don't worry about it. I'll just quote it. The commandment is a lamp, and the law is light, and reproofs of instructions are the way of life. So in that verse, Proverbs 6:23, it says the commandment is a lamp, and the law is a light. So when Moses came out of the presence of God, he was bearing the law, which is called the light. So he was the light bearer. He was bearing the light of God on his person, and he was bearing the light of God and the instructions that were on the two tables of stone. The commandment is a lamp, the law is light, and reproof and instructions are the way of life. And so he was actually given a portrait of what Lucifer's original position was.
Wow.
See what I'm saying? So it's like when you understand what's going on, and again, when you understand from the beginning that mankind was meant to take the place of those who fell, and you see Moses in the presence of God, and he coming out of the presence of God, and this light is on his face, and it said the people were afraid. What that means is they were in awe. Now you imagine Lucifer. This is Moses only seen the back parts. Lucifer's position is to stand face to face in the presence of God all the time. Can you imagine the light coming off of him when he would come down from the mountain of God? Remember, we talked about in Revelation, before the throne of God is this sea of glass mingled with fire. And it says that he walked up and down, the stones of fire. He was in the mountain of God. So he comes down from the throne of God to instruct the rest of the angels. And this guy is spectacular with light. And he's supposed to give the instructions on, the government of God, because the Ten Commandments, his law, represents his government. And so this was Lucifer's position.
And it's ironic that, Moses is coming down with the, with the law. And that's the one thing that Lucifer was just kind of tossed to the side. We're like, listen, this.
Yeah, he gave up his name.
Yeah.
Name the most character and purpose.
Right.
He was the light bearer. When he cast that off, he became darkness. That's why he's called the Prince of Darkness. So it's very interesting, like I said, that Moses gives us a picture of his original position. Light bearer was not just, knowledge, wisdom, understanding. It was both the outer light bearing and the spiritual meaning of light, which is the instruction of God.
So when you talk about position, I don't know if we were gonna if you were gonna touch on this later about the similarities on how he was created with Adam and man as far as position.
Yeah, I mean, we touched upon it already when we say he was put in Eden.
Right.
Again, we see that with Adam. We see him created, then God gives us details of creation and that he was put in Eden. And then the next thing we get is his fall. Now, in Ezekiel 28, we're getting the creation of Lucifer and then his position in Eden and on the mountain of God. Then the next things that we get is the details of his fall. So we're actually following Genesis 1, 2, and 3, but this is now Lucifer's story.
Which in this case, he was created in Eden in heaven.
Yes.
Man was created in the Eden on earth.
Yes.
The replacement.
Exactly.
Basically.
Exactly. So if we go back to Ezekiel 28 and look at verse 15 now. Verse 15. Here's where we transition into his fall. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created. So that means everything before 15 is talking about in the days of his creation, before this next line, till iniquity was found in thee. So now we're transitioning, quote unquote, into a Genesis chapter 3 scenario. Adam was perfect in all his ways until Genesis chapter 3. Satan was perfect in all his ways till iniquity was found in him. It's following the same pattern. You're getting his creation, details of creation, his position, Eden, the mountain of God, is in harmony with God, then iniquity is found in him. So it's the same story. And that's why we're plugging it in here at Genesis chapter 3. You know what I'm saying? The way God has set up his word, he's trying to show you things that happened before you were created. Even in Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, he's showing you that Lucifer and these other angels went through the same thing. They were also created perfect. They were also put in a perfect environment. They were also given positions of responsibility till they used their free will to commit iniquity.
And we had discussed this earlier. That's one of the things, the different factors of the salvation that we have because of that as man that they don't have.
Yeah, they were in a different position. How I look at it, a very simplified version is, it's one thing to fall from the first floor and to fall from the top of the Empire State Building. You know what I'm saying? It's a different fall. You might bruise a few things, but there's hope for you if you fall from the first floor of a building. Person fall out the top floor, the Empire State, it's like,
it's a wrap.
Yeah, it's a wrap. And so because they fell from a position where they were constantly in the presence of God,
Mhm.
there was not more for God to reveal to them about his character. See, Adam and Eve were just brought forth on a planet and so on and so forth. They were very new to life itself. They still didn't know the character of God the way the angels, had known him, being in his presence at all times.
Mhm.
And so they were still given, I think, a space to repent,
Mhm.
but they did not. It takes time to convince 1/3 of a unnumbered multitude of angels to turn away from God. This thing
Right.
didn't happen in a day or two. You know what I'm saying?
And it just kind of leads into the big thing about the iniquity, the thing that ties, that conflict, and that's free will.
Exactly. Exactly. Free will is the thing that makes an intelligent being intelligent, but also creates the opportunity for him to be the biggest fool.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? It separates us from the instinctive creatures.
Mhm.
But at the same time, though that free will makes you an intelligent being,
Mhm.
it gives you the choice to be the most foolish.
Mhm.
And this is how Satan exercises free will and then, deceived these angels into exercising their will to rebel against God so they went to the point of no return. And so free will can lift you up to the highest heights in God's, or it can drop you down to the lowest degrading, actions and works in darkness.
Mm.
So let's look at verses 16 and 17. It says, "Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness." Do you see that?
Mhm.
His heart was lifted up because of his beauty, and let me read again. He has corrupted his wisdom by reason of his brightness. Verse 16, though, says this: "By the multitude of thy merchandise, they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned." So you see that now he's looking at his beauty, he's looking at his wisdom, he's looking at his merchandise. Now, merchandise just means all of these gifts that he got from God. He got everything.
Right.
You talk about, you might say in this world, a spoiled rich kid.
Mhm.
Lucifer, every gift possible that you could give a being, Lucifer had. So the multitude of his merchandise has filled the midst of him with violence, and he has sinned. So now he's looking at himself instead of looking at God and saying, "Man, I appreciate all this that you gave me. I didn't work for it. I didn't do anything for it. I was created, and you gave me all these gifts." But now he's looking at himself and comparing himself to others who don't have these things the way he does. And he's saying, maybe I deserve to be even further above them. You know what I'm saying? I'm one of a kind.
Right.
So let's go over to Isaiah 14 real quick. Let's piece in Isaiah 14, where he's called by name. Isaiah 14. Because again, now we see, what it was that as he looked at his beauty, as he looked at, the amount of wisdom that he had, as he looked at all these gifts that he had, he began to develop in his heart an idea that since he was one of a kind, so unique, that he should, maybe even have worship like God has.
Right.
And this is what we see in Isaiah 14. And again, we're tying in the details to piece together, a motion picture of his story. So we've gotten his creation, we've gotten some details of his creation and his original position. We've now moved into the place where iniquity is found in him. And as we go to Isaiah 14, I want you to notice, starting at verse 12, where it names him by name again, it says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said," where? "Thou hast said in thine heart," verse 13, "I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." Now I want you to notice that he said this in his heart.
And that's where it was found. That's where it started.
Thank you. So we're giving a detail that before this rebellion happened, this is what happened first. Ezekiel says it one way. You have corrupted your wisdom and your beauty, and the multitude of the merchandise that fill the midst of thee with violence. The midst of thee is talking about within you, your heart. So you started to look at yourself and become prideful. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. Lifted up means pride. You have corrupted your wisdom by reason of your brightness. And then it filled the midst of thee with violence. What do you mean? You're going to try to get a position that you can't get no other way but violence. You're going to sit on the throne of God. How else can you get that position but by violence?
Wow.
So now it's showing you that this is how it started. In his heart, he began to say, this is what I'm going to do. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. When it's saying stars of God and clouds, this is actually talking about the other angels. In Revelation chapter 1, I think it's verse 20, it says the 7 stars which thou sawest are the angels. You know what I'm saying? So this is actual symbols that God uses for angel. Clouds, they are in the heavens, right? Stars are in the heavens. So yeah, this is actually talking. He's going to lift himself above the angels to the place of God and receive their worship.
Wow.
So though he was a highly exalted officer, he was not allowed to receive like the worship, the total submission of the angels to his will. That was for God alone.
And see, it speaks to even where, it ties into, people say that we don't have to, obey some of the commandments, right? But now it's kind of, it was supposed to be on the fleshy part of your heart. That's where everything kind of takes place. That's what's going to be judged, what's going on inside of you. So before that's where the change has to come from. You have to change from inside. And it can be for good or for bad. And it's just like,
And that's not anything new. That's restoring. See, when we fell, we lost something. He has come to redeem. He has come to restore. So we lost the mind of God and the heart that had the law written on it. And now he's trying to restore it.
Here's an interesting little thought. It's funny how he realizes that he has all these gifts from God, right?
Yeah.
You would think that he would be grateful, but he throws it off on Job when he talks to God. He's like, the only reason he's worshiping you is because you gave him all this stuff. Okay, so what happened to you? You had all this stuff too.
And so now you see this argument in court, and it's like, well, somebody with their eyes open is like, but wait a minute. You know what I'm saying? That's you. You actually accusing Job of what you're guilty of.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's what he does.
Yeah.
The accuser, he influences and tempts you to do something wrong, then points at you for doing something wrong. See what I'm saying? He's always accusing others of his very character. Even the righteous. So he's saying that the only reason they serve you, Christ, is because you offering them heaven. In our court system, it's like you witness tampering. See what I'm saying? And that's what he's saying. He's like, you are witness tampering.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But it didn't work for you. He had the highest position possible for any created being to have. Again, the same thing he did to Eve. Eve had the highest position possible for any woman on this earth ever to have, queen mother of the entire earth. After her, there was no higher position for a woman to have on this planet. Through the 5th commandment, she would have received homage from every being born on this planet. You shall be like gods. Really? She was the closest thing to what God is, right where God had put her. That was the highest position any woman on this planet could ever have.
Wow.
So he knows that he can make you, downplay what God has done for you and not be appreciative. That's what we talked about in Genesis chapter 3. Causing this shallow depth of field that you focus on a restriction instead of all the blessing that God has given you.
Right.
Because he knows that's what happened to him.
Right.
Through his own fall, he mastered temptation. The same thought process I went through to move me away from God is the same thing I have to recreate in the mind of other people.
So while we're talking about the adversary and the accuser and his character, When you said the power of temptation, I think we may have touched on this before in the previous podcast, but he has mastered it because he convinced a third of the angels
In
to,
heaven.
and that's no small feat. I mean, they're in heaven. It takes a special type of individual while they're in heaven with God in the presence of God to get into those angels' ears and be like, listen.
Yeah. I think about it this way because I'm the youngest of 7 children. And one of my brothers was like my favorite person in the world,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I see if he had told me something about my mother and father, I would have given ear to it. See what I'm saying? Satan was, yes, an angel, but he was kind of the older brother. He was the one that dealt with them probably even more than God did. And so they have built a relationship and a trust. Now, before he sinned, everything that Satan said was 100.
Yeah.
100 up to a certain point. So he has influence. That's why he has learned to use affections to draw people away.
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought about this when I'm like, man, if put my brother, God forbid, in Lucifer's position and growing up under him, I had probably more of an affection for him because, he's the one that's playing with you all the time and so on and so forth. He's the one that's kind of, you want to be like and so on. He's cool and all this other stuff. It's like if he starts telling me lies, like I've been here for a long time. I was here before you. I know what you don't know. And everything he's told me before that has been 100. He starts putting stuff in my ear. I'm going to be like, man, everything he's told me before has been 100.
Wow.
So maybe he's right.
You hit something. You said he has perfected using affection. And that's exactly what he did to Adam through Eve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly what he used.
That's what he does today. He uses it with your children.
Yeah.
Some behavior that your children, God says is, sinful and this, that, and the other, but because it's your child now and you got a different perspective on it. No, ain't different perspective. You can still love the child, but the activity is still wrong. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So he will use affections to draw you away from God.
Wow.
And so let's move on. We're going to tell the audience, we're going to make sure we keep these at an hour from going forward.
Yes.
For your sake and for our sake.
Yes.
We're going to keep these at an hour. But in Ezekiel 28, and we just touched upon this actually. We kind of just touched upon it, without even trying. Ezekiel 28 and verse 18, it says, "Thou hast defiled thy sanctuary by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic." Now again, he defiled his sanctuaries. Now, sanctuaries is kind of a term for temple, tabernacle, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And we know from the New Testament that the temple of God is not wood, stone, and brick, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Paul said in 1 Corinthians, "Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you?" Mm-hmm. And so the beings that God created, these intelligent beings, it was meant for his character, his spirit to dwell in them as the temple of God. Mm-hmm. And so when it says he has corrupted, his sanctuaries, it's talking about those angels that he corrupted with the lies. The same way he does with the temples of God on earth. He will corrupt mankind. And so that's what we just talked about. He used his position of trust. These people, not people, but angels that had affection for him. They loved him. He was the light bearer. He's the one who teaches us the ways of God. Can you imagine if Moses comes down and starts telling you stuff about God that's not true? Imagine that. This is the guy that brought you the law. This is the guy that had you build the sanctuary. This is the guy that's been talking to God face to face. Now Moses comes down and starts telling you, I know some things you don't know.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Right.
You have to realize it. Like, he ought to know. You know what I'm saying? He stands in the presence of God. We down here. He's the one that brought us the light. He's the one that brought us the law and instruction. So up to this point, it's been 100. And so now he corrupts these sanctuaries, he's talking about the other angels, with his lies.
Wow.
So again, that's lies and so on and so forth. I hope we don't have to go through scriptures to explain everything, but The defiling substance was lies.
Mhm.
And John 8:44 just says he's a liar and the father of it. And so in Revelation 12, we kind of get a picture of this too. Let's turn to Revelation 12. Revelation chapter 12. And again, we going through these scriptures this way because as we go from this one to this one, it fills in the blanks of the story. So in Revelation 12, we start to see what happened.
Yeah, and really quick, that's why it's so important to have a grasp of Genesis, because Genesis helps to connect pretty much all of the other scriptures.
Yes. As I always say, everything that you believe from the Bible, if it's true, you should be able to trace it from Genesis all the way to Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
It starts in the beginning and it fulfills in the end.
Alpha and Omega.
Yes. Revelation chapter 12. And we're going to look at verses 3 and 4. It says, and there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. Verse 9 tells us that that dragon is the old serpent, Genesis chapter 3, called the devil and Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 4 says, and his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven. His tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven. Now, we talked about in the beginning about, Satan with the red and the pitchfork and the tail.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where he got it from. I don't know.
Maybe.
Maybe. But it's a symbol. The dragon is again illustrating his character.
Mm-hmm.
He has no love for you. It's like the dragon stood before the woman to devour her child as soon as it was born. Satan is fully sold out to this warfare. As a matter of fact, I made an acronym for the name Satan. Satan. The sworn adversary to all nations.
Mm.
He is completely sold out to his cause against Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And if the followers of Christ don't get completely sold out to the cause of Christ, he will overcome them.
Mm.
You have to be fully sold out to the cause of Christ, the way Paul was, the way Peter was, the way John was. Eventually, they weren't at the beginning before they were in it for the kingdom. I'm saying that's all they had their mind on was the reward after the cross. And after Acts chapter 2, when they, confessed their sins and they saw themselves, they yielded themselves totally to the cause of Christ.
Mm.
And there was nothing that could stop them from that point.
So when it says his tail drew, what is that referring to?
All right. Good question. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 15, I think it is. Isaiah 15. Revelation is the final exam. You know what I'm saying? Revelation is the final exam. You have to know where to look to get the symbols of Revelation. Isaiah 9:15. And it says, the ancient and honorable, he is the head. The prophet that teacheth what? Lies. He
is the
the tail.
Wow.
So his tail
Lies.
drew a third part of the angels. Thou hast corrupted thy sanctuaries. You know what I'm saying? Defile thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thy traffic. Now we use the word traffic in law for like drugs, alcohol, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So Satan is in heaven trafficking, but it's lies. It's an intoxicating substance.
Wow.
It is a substance that makes you stumble. It's a substance that can take your life. So he, through lies, his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven.
And that's just a testament to, when you study and you have to let scripture interpret scripture and give you definitive answers instead of coming up with your own interpretation.
Yeah.
Because that's really, that's just amazing. I'm like, I've seen it and read it 1,000 times until you just kind of really brought it to my attention. And in my mind, I'm not really picturing it, what it is. I have an illustration of it, but now this solidifies. It's the lies that actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in one place it says you defile your sanctuaries. Another place Christ says it plainly. He is a liar and the father of it. Revelation says his tail.
Mm.
It's one story. God is not telling 2 or 3 different stories. He's telling one story in different ways. We see the same thing when Christ was here on the earth. He was telling the story of the gospel, but he talked about it as, the shepherd losing a sheep, the woman losing a coin, the sower went forth to sow. All these things are telling the same story in different ways. So throughout the Bible, he's telling us the same story in different ways, in different symbols. So in Revelation 12, he uses the symbol of the dragon and his tail. And the tail is now lies. And then Revelation 12 also, go down to verse 7, it gives us the outcome. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 7. And there was war in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. So we just, based on Ezekiel 28, Isaiah 14, and Revelation 12, and there's other, little nuanced scriptures as well. We just seen Satan's creation, how he was in his original position, how he transitioned into his fall, and then the work he did after that by the lies. And then the outcome was there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and they prevailed not in heaven. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And Christ says this in Luke 10:18. And Christ said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Lightning? There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. They were cast out like lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Like lightning. And that's what we said before, that, he shall bruise thy head and thou shalt bruise his heel. Satan tried the war in heaven where Christ wears the crown. Like lightning, he was cast out of there. And then it was a different battlefield, with a different principles of war.
Wow.
And his head got bruised where he had, laid up his kingdom, or, made his kingdom.
Wow.
And so that's kind of his backstory. And then we get to Genesis chapter 3. And we studied that one already. So we're not going to go through all the details of Genesis chapter 3.
Mm-hmm.
But that's basically where we pick up the action. Is this new order of beings brought into creation. They don't know nothing about nothing, saying. And God gives them a prohibition. And they're not ready for me.
And, with that knowledge, Satan, knowing he was a created being, knowing that man was a created being, he understood the propensity of how that can go the other way. If I can figure out a way to break away from God's law and his righteousness, then I know if he created him like he created me, then I know that I can get them.
Yeah, they're not ready.
Yeah.
They're not ready at all.
Yeah.
Not just himself, 1/3 of the angels by the time he meets up with Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
He's done this thousands, millions, maybe billions of times over before we see him in Genesis chapter 3. That's what I'm saying. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven. When you see the numbers of the stars of heaven described, like Daniel and John, it's like there's thousands, 10,000 times 10,000s and thousands of thousands. It's so many that it would be impossible to calculate. And his tail drew 1/3 part. So this did not happen in a year or 100 years or whatever. It took a long time.
So here's a bonus question. I know we're going to be wrapping up soon.
Yes.
So the fallen angels, would you say they're demons?
Yes.
Okay.
Demons, familiar spirits, devils, all those first of fallen angels.
It's very interesting the fact now that the way they rampage the earth, with the wrath that they do, is because, at least I'm looking at it this way, they know that man has a chance of salvation and they don't. They can never have that.
No, they don't have that opportunity. The plan of salvation was not put in place for those angels that fall. As a matter of fact, the scripture says they are kept in chains of darkness until the judgment. Mm-hmm. Christ said, depart ye into everlasting fire that was prepared for the devil and his angels. Mm-hmm. So the hellfire was prepared for them. Mm-hmm. Men who choose to go their way end up there, but it was not prepared for mankind.
Right.
So it's only prepared for those in mankind who choose Satan as their governing power.
Right.
But so we will stop there as far as this discussion goes. I think we want to have a part 2.
Absolutely.
Where we talk about Satan's devices. So we'll talk about Lucifer's tragedy part 2, and we'll look at his devices. Because I think also as believers, we need to understand how he works.
Yes.
And of course, we just talked about the chief way he works is the lies.
Yes.
And the very first lie, the chief lie, was ye shall not surely die.
Mm.
And that has been, key in him drawing people away from perfect obedience to God from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
He has to make you comfortable in that disobedience before he can convince you into that disobedience. So the first thing he did was take away the penalty for disobedience, at least in the imagination of Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just repackaged that lie over generation to generation. So after man died, like we said in Genesis chapter 5, he died. Well, his spirit lives on.
Wow. This just kind of, wow. God always kind of downloads things real quick. And I'm going to say this real quick. He needed Eve to partake of the tree of good evil because he needed to be able to confuse the two. That's the only way that his devices kind of begin.
Yeah.
He needs you to be confused over, oh, this is good and this could be good. This is bad. Like, if it's just good, then if it's just evil, you could just say, oh, that's evil.
That's evil.
Yeah. But now he needed her to be exposed to that so that he can really take reign and do what he needed to do.
Not only that, he needed visible evidence that his lie was true.
Yes.
See, with Adam, Eve is already eating of the fruit.
Yeah.
Obviously, she didn't look no different.
Mm.
So here now we got visible evidence that if you eat of the tree, you will not surely die.
Mm.
So, it would take more than just this statement for Adam. So now here's this person he has the ultimate affection for, who is already eaten from the tree, and she is still in love with him. She is still coming to him. She is not dead. So now I have visible evidence that my lie is true.
Wow. So on that note, we're going to wrap this episode up. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope that it's inspired you to dig deeper. And we hope that you join us for the next episode as we kind of dive into Satan's devices. And remember, the lies, deceit, be careful what you expose yourself to. You have to go through this world with God's consciousness and God's righteousness at hand, because if not, you will be overcome. So please make sure that you like, follow, share so that you can get notifications for the next videos that drop. We'll periodically be dropping different quick studies, even some lives here and there. But we want to continue God's work, and we thank you for being a part. And we will see you in the next podcast episode. Thank you.
Amen.
The Sabbath is on Sunday, right? I've been going to church on Sunday forever.
Jesus came to fulfill the law, so we don't have to keep the 10 Commandments, right?
God's laws were not meant for us today. We are under His grace, right?
Those are old Mosaic laws, and we are under the new covenant, right?
Why does God let bad things happen? Why doesn't He just destroy Satan, right?
The 10 Commandments were stolen from ancient Egypt, right?
The Bible says that our loved ones go right to heaven when they die, right?
If the Bible was written by men, how can it be God's word, right?
Will God send me to burn in hell forever?
Are you sure? If not, be sure to tune into the podcast that inspires Bible believers to become Bible students. Grab your Bibles and let's find out. Are you sure? Be sure to tune in Sundays at 6 p.m.